Clap your hands and stomp your feet. You're listening to the Clap Your Hands podcast, hosted by Eliot Shorr-Parks and Kyle Neubeck. Here they go.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Clap Your Hands, brought to you by Audacy Sports. Make sure you download that app. You get all the episodes first when you do. Brought to you by Sportsradio 94 WIP. And today, Kyle, brought to you by my favorite team in Philly history, my favorite athlete in Philly history. We're talking about the 0-1 Sixers today. Super excited to get into the documentary. For those that don't know, and you must be living under a rock if you don't know, the documentary is out now, Everything But the Chip. It chronicles the 0-1 season. We have an awesome interview with Brittany Hardy, who was the director, producer, and honestly fan of the team, which was really cool. So before we get to that, Kyle, I did just want to talk a little bit. We both watched it. We both lived it. Curious what your thoughts on the documentary were.
I thought it was good. I'm always like, when I'm taking notes when I'm watching stuff like this, it's always like, why isn't this in here? Why isn't this in there? But like, there's a lot of stuff that I felt like I was able to gain a deeper appreciation for. I thought that Brittany and her team did a really good job to include, which I thought was very important, the Theo Ratliff kind of version of this Sixers team, because I think it's been kind of forgotten in history that they were really good prior to trading for Dikembe Mutombo and making that big splashy midseason trade. And during the interview that people are about to listen to, she said that it seemed like there was some emotional residue of trading away Theo, who had grown up with Allen, grown up with the team. And so I thought the documentary did a good job of, obviously the focus is Iverson and Larry Brown and sort of that relationship and how that, I guess, centered the franchise, right? Like there's the famous meeting with Pat Croce to get those two guys on the same page. And are they going to trade Allen? Are they not going to trade Allen? Will Larry leave? Like there's all these questions at any given time. And I thought weaving all that in, like the stuff that we know alongside with maybe some stuff we don't know, and putting together the story of that. I think the regular season often gets lost when we talk about that team. It's obviously, we know, hey, a lot of back and forths with Vince Carter in round 2, the step over with Ty Lue, but there's a long journey to get there. And so I was glad to see that chronicled, because that's the part that I think you see much less of. You see a lot of Iverson documentaries are, hey, look at this background he came from, goes to Georgetown, he crosses over Michael Jordan, and okay, now he's just like in the finals and scoring 48 points in game 1. And so I was glad to see Brittany's documentary show us the journey and show us all that it took just to get to that moment.
So I agree with that 100%, because it was interesting, as a 13-year-old or whatever I was when this happened, my memory of it is so extremely, like, unequivocally positive, right? I remember how awesome Iverson was. I remember how awesome the step over was. I remember him out-dueling Vince Carter. I remember them starting 10-0. I remember the fans reacting to that team that way. And I think the documentary does a great job of showing that. And when the documentary ended, one of the thoughts I had was, man, I am so lucky I got to grow up with Iverson as my favorite athlete. Just like experiencing that and having that be the person. 'Cause let's be honest, the older you get, it is harder to connect to an athlete in that way. When you're young in those formative years, the athletes that are around there, those are the guys that are your favorite athletes. Like some Philly fans if they grew up around 08, they love McNabb, they love Rollins, they love Utley. I was lucky to get Iverson as my favorite athlete. And I think the documentary really shows his journey. But I thought the other part that was interesting was, I wonder how, as an adult or as media members, me and you would have perceived that 0-1 team, because the stuff that happened, I didn't remember at all, was wild. Like Larry Brown taking time off. It's, a game or
that
two.
Part I had forgotten about.
Right. Can you imagine in today's world if Doc Rivers would have taken 2 games off because he couldn't stand coaching Joel Embiid, and then he just comes back like it's no big deal? Or there's every single day, Iverson's going to get traded. Iverson's going to get traded. He's basically traded, and then he's not because of the Matt Geiger thing, which I did remember. But imagine in today's world, that stuff happening. And I also think that we've talked so much about Joel and Harden recently as like, are they winners? Are they losers? Can you win with them? Do they have that mentality? Whatever. I could picture me personally being very annoying during the Iverson thing of, this guy's not a winner. You got to get him out of here, trade him, blah, blah, blah. And so what's cool to like look back on it now is when you see the completed journey is just in today's world. And she talked about this, and I thought her answer on how they would be perceived in today's world was very interesting, but it does kind of highlight how in today's media world and as a fan and everything, we're so reactionary and so like quick to want to make changes whenever anything doesn't go well. And that Sixers team, where so many times where I think if I was covering them or if I was an adult during it, I would have been like, yep, it's done. You got to blow it up. They're losing.
Blow it up.
Yeah, they can't beat the Pacers. Iverson won't practice. Like, what are we doing with this guy? And so I thought, it was cool to be able to watch it from two perspectives of how that team would be viewed today, but also getting to remember, like the childhood part of me of how fun that team was.
Yeah. So even as and I joked to her at the end of the interview that my cold-hearted media self was able to like go back through time and experience my childhood again. It was very cool. I do think that it was nice that we're close enough to this happening that the people who were involved with it still have strong memories, and memories where it's probably not distorted that much. The problem when you get too far away from when things happen is that the story gets rewritten 4 or 5 times, and then guys are telling inaccurate versions of what happened. But so the 20-ish years or so that were removed from when all this happened gave everybody a really good bit of perspective. Like, I think you could tell whether it was Allen, Larry, Theo, George Lynch, Aaron McKee, like all these guys talked about it and recognized it as this once in a lifetime type season, that it was like, hey, one of my biggest regrets is not being able to get it over the line that year, that this was a special year and a special group, and talking about their regrets pretty openly. Like I thought that both Larry and Allen really more so said that he was the cause of, I believe it was 99% of all the problems between him and Larry. I personally disagree with that, and I think Larry probably disagrees with that. I thought it was really eye-opening. And Pat Croce saying to Larry essentially that when Allen hears certain things from you, he's hearing it as if it's coming from, I'm trying to think of the phrasing. Did he say like a prison guard or
Yeah, I remember that part. Yep.
And I thought that was really eye-opening. And it certainly looked like it was eye-opening for Larry, that was a real breakthrough moment for him, that he heard that not from Allen, but from somebody that was basically the mediator for the two of them. And so there were a lot of cool moments like that. The one thing that I really regret that basically there just wasn't time for, when they were talking about Game 7 of the Toronto series, and Aaron McKee is talking about, I'm in the huddle with Tyrone Hill saying, we're going to switch this action. We're going to switch this. And they're fighting about that. I feel like that's the kind of stuff in basketball documentaries that they just don't touch on as much compared to football, where you're in the huddle with the coach and you're hearing the play calls. And, NFL Films generally does a really good job of including that stuff. And I thought that was a very cool snapshot of that moment, that I've watched that Vince Carter shot rim out, 250 times in my life. And I never heard Aaron McKee get interviewed about what the plan is on defense going into it. And I wish there was a whole documentary series where we could get into, all that kind of stuff.
Well, and this is honestly not meant to defend Doc, but it is funny how a few pods ago, we talked about that Rasheed Wallace clip where he was saying they would be in a huddle with Doc, and then they'd get out the huddle and be like, all right, let's just figure it out on our own. And that was viewed as such a Doc doesn't, he doesn't adjust. Like no one likes him, whatever. And then Aaron McKee and Tyrone Hill say this about what is, arguably the best coach in Sixers history, or certainly on that list. And we just view it so differently. So I think, that is one of the cool parts of the documentary, is just getting new perceptions on this and, all that. So let's get into the interview with Brittany. Super interesting. What I also thought was interesting was hearing both her stories from the documentary. But if you're someone that's in media or someone that wants to get into it, her perspective on how she prepares for an interview and all those things, I thought were really interesting. So this is we're going to get right into the interview with Brittany Hardy, the director and producer of the 01 Sixers, Everything But the Chip. I really hope you guys enjoy it. All right, welcome to the pod, Brittany Hardy, the director and producer of the 01 Sixers, Everything But the Chip, kind enough to join us to talk about, let's be honest, a topic we bring up every pod anyway, because I'm obsessed with the 2001 Sixers, the documentary that just came out. If you haven't seen it yet, obviously you should check it out. Me and Kyle both watched it. It is awesome. It was a great trip down memory lane. Brittany, thank you so much for joining. I'm excited to talk to you about how this all came together and the best team in Philly sports history.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to talk to you both.
Yes, very, very excited. So I guess like the first question I had to kind of take this on a larger scale is, you told us you went to Temple, you were in Philly when kind of all this happened. What made you decide to do this? Like, how did this begin? How'd you get involved in it? And just, doing a documentary about this team?
Yes. So I'm from New York, but I went to school at Temple University. And now I work at Turner Sports, which is known as WDB Sports now. So I produce content for both NBA TV and TNT. So on NBA TV, we have this thing called Basketball Stories. And I had produced 2 docs before. And everybody knows I love Allen Iverson. Like
Obviously. Come on. Yeah.
I love Allen Iverson. Ever since I was a little kid, I loved him. And I actually produced a doc for NBA basketball stories before on the 96 draft. So I had interviewed him before already. And since everybody at work knows that I love Allen Iverson, last August, my supervisor came up to me and was just like, all right, the next doc that's on deck is going to be on the 2001 76ers. Do you want to do it? And my boss knows he didn't even have to ask me. So he was laughing when he asked me. And I was like, oh, yes, I'm all in. And the last time I got to interview Allen Iverson was via Zoom because it was during the pandemic. So the NBA wasn't allowing us to interview him in person. And so this time it was going to be in person. So my boss was just like, so now you get to interview him in person and you're going to just take off and run with it. And that's exactly what I did. So that's how this started, because everybody knows that I love Allen Iverson and this project couldn't have gone to anybody else. It just had to go to me. Exactly. It had to just go to me. And so it started last August, honestly, about like my boss just bringing this idea to me, like this was next on the list. And we just rolled with it after that.
So as someone who seems like they were a pretty big fan of Allen, I mean, even prior to doing all this, I guess, how has your perception of him changed now that you've spent, whether it's via Zoom or in person now, how has your perception of him changed? I would assume for the better, because my personal interactions with him have always been, very positive, but, you never know behind the scenes. So what was it like dealing with Allen specifically, I guess?
So I always said, like, I have met a lot of people being a producer in sports. I have interviewed a ton of people. Most of them have been amazing. Mostly everybody has been amazing to work with and to talk to. But I always was nervous to meet, some of like my idols. Like I always just was nervous to meet like a Jay-Z or Beyonce or Jordan. And Allen Iverson is right up there with them. And I was just like, I'm a very like passionate person, which is why I love Allen Iverson, because he literally brought his passion. You can see it on the court every single night. And I love that about him. He literally gave it his all. And that's exactly me as a person, as a producer, or anything that I'm passionate about. So, the first time that I interviewed him, I was telling my parents, it was like, I'm so nervous because he's my favorite player of all time. I don't I don't want him to be mean to me and then I'm not going to like him anymore. But it was the complete opposite. Like both times that I've interviewed him, he was amazing. He was an amazing person. He is an amazing person. And I would say with him, like, you will get an honest answer every time you ask him a question. It has to be a good question. Like, you can't just ask him, like, what color is the sky? Because he's just going to say blue and not give you an explanation. But if you give him a question that he can, like, really go in depth into, he will talk to you and he would just keep on talking. And as long as he feels comfortable, like, he will keep on going. So when I interviewed him for this doc, the interview was for an hour and 45 minutes because he just wanted to keep on talking.
Wow.
he didn't want to leave. And I kept saying, okay, I just have one more question. And he was just like, no, I'm here. Let's keep going. And he was so cool about it. And he like actually enjoyed it. And at the end of the interview, he was just like, this was an excellent interview. Like, this was great. And that is all I needed. Like, after the interview, I told my parents, because my parents
like career validation right there. Exactly. Allen Iverson likes you.
That before I interviewed him, I was telling my camera guys and my audio guy, I was just like, this is my NBA finals right here. Like, this is it. Me interviewing Allen Iverson. This is my NBA finals. So like, we literally was getting hyped before the interview came in. And so after he left, like, we all just gave each other a hug because it went so well and he loved it. And that was, like you said, validation. So I got the opportunity to interview him. And then after that, I called my parents, like FaceTime, and I was crying because they know how much I loved him. And it was just special. It was just a great moment. So I would just say, to me, it enhanced, you know, my love for Allen Iverson after I interviewed him, because he truly is a great person.
So as a fellow Temple grad, I want to tell this story real quick. I remember one time when I was in high school, I got tutoring at Temple. So I went to Central High School and I took the subway down to Temple. I get off the subway and it's like mass hysteria. And I see girls like literally crying, people like running down the street. And I'm like, what in the world is going on right here? And I look and it was just Iverson, Tyrone Hill, and I think maybe Aaron McKee just walking down the street. And it was like, I mean, I wasn't alive when the Beatles were around, but that's what it felt like in terms of just
the Philadelphia Beatles.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It felt that way. I mean, there was just, people love Allen Iverson, and seeing that in person was cool. But my question for you is, what's interesting about Iverson, and what I think people connect with him in a way is he is not a perfect person, and he'll be very honest about that. So for as much as I love Iverson and he is my favorite athlete ever, there's certainly things he's done in his career in Philadelphia that, you know, in terms of being a role model, would probably not check that box. So I'm curious, as a fellow Iverson fan, when doing the documentary, how did you walk that line of, you want to, you know, put him in a positive light because he deserves that, but also balance with the kind of off the court stuff? Because in the documentary, it gets into that quite a bit, you know, the stuff with his wife, the practice stuff, the trade demands, his relationship with Larry Brown. How did you walk that line of, you know, criticizing him fairly while also wanting to paint him in a positive light?
Yeah. So for me, I approach all interviews as like, everybody's human, right? We all have our highs and our lows. And but I also want to be respectful, and I also want to tell the story right. So that's how I go into it. Before the interview, you know, I would just tell him like, hey, here are the things that I want to talk about. And I do that with everybody. Here are the things that I want to talk about in this interview. And whatever, say if he didn't though. Say if he did have an issue, before cameras are rolling, I want to talk about it. So that to me, I'm really not in the business of trying to make somebody look bad. I don't want to surprise anybody at all. Like, I, for real, genuinely, like, want to tell their story. And I want to be able to tell it in a way that everybody's happy with. Like, I don't want to like hurt anybody's feelings. But I also want to be factual, right? So with him, I mean, it's no secret. Like, everybody knows that he has had an up and down roller coaster for the 76ers. And this Allen Iverson, present day Allen Iverson, and it's funny because we're doing this interview on his birthday, but present day Allen Iverson, he realizes his highs and his lows with the 76ers. And like, when I was interviewing him, he was just like, I'm an open book. Like, what question do you want to know? I will answer it, and I will answer it honestly. So talking about the trade, talking about his highs and the lows with the 76ers, to me, again, like, this was a full circle moment, because like, I got to interview like a more mature person, Allen Iverson, who has had the time to reflect on his wrongdoings. And in the doc, he literally says, in my third segment, he literally says, like, I was the cause of 99% of what went wrong between me and Larry Brown. So like, for me, I make sure that, you know, I am not in any shape or form, you know, making up stories, or I make sure that we talk about like the hard stuff that's going to happen. or that we're going to do the interview about. And then we would talk it out before getting on camera, because I'm not really into surprises. I'm not really into making people look bad at all. I wholeheartedly just want people to be happy with the finished product. And that was that. So like, it wasn't, I was nervous, I'm not gonna lie, going into that interview, because I was just like, oh my God, what if he doesn't take some of these questions, the right way? But like with Allen Iverson, like, I think as long as you're respectful, and I am a respectful person, as long as you're respectful, you're good. And he would answer your question honestly. So that was that.
To your point about maturation, I know he's obviously much older than Allen, but I think I have seen, or we have seen collectively, that sort of happen for Larry Brown too, where, as you show in the documentary, part of the problem, even if Allen says it was 99% on him, is that they were both, big ego, big personality. They think they're driving the bus, so to speak. And so I thought it was interesting to see, Larry look back on those years and say, yeah, maybe I should have looked at this a different way. And relating to him off the court, like what Allen's going through as just like a person, let alone what he's going through as a player. And so I thought you did a really good job of capturing that. And, I guess, what was it like revisiting that with Larry? Because he seemed like he was pretty emotional about, that time period of his life.
Yeah. Along with Larry Brown crying, because I've never seen Larry Brown cry before. I've always seen him be like very like
tough guy. Yeah.
He cried hard too. Like he got up and he was not just a little tear. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. And I swear I wasn't trying to make him cry. But Dean Smith is someone that is really special to him. So it brought that out of him. But same thing with Larry. Like I went into that, and me and Larry had a long talk prior to starting the interview about the things that I wanted to discuss. And we talked things out a little bit. And again, Larry's at the stage right now where it's more so like this happened. This is how we got through it, and I'm just going to talk about it. But one thing during the interview that really like stuck with me was like, well, two things actually. Larry Brown said like, he wished, like, their biggest beef was like Allen's work ethic
Yeah.
at practice, right? And so he just said like, he wished that he was able to get through Allen at that time, because he truly believed that Allen could have been like the greatest basketball player of all time. Whether you are an Allen Iverson fan or not, to me that resonated, because basically he's 6 feet, so a 6 foot guy during a time like at that time, like there were true centers in the NBA, right?
Yeah.
You had to deal with Shaq. And still, Allen Iverson was taking it to the hole every single night and not afraid of anybody. And he was, he was a scoring champion numerous of times, and he won MVP. Like he was dominant in a league that had true centers and true big people and all the other stuff. And I don't want to like offend anybody, because there are true centers now in the NBA. But
all right, we know Jokic sucks. You don't have to.
Oh my God.
we don't have to get into that. We know Jokic
somehow
okay,
he came up on the pod.
It's okay. You don't have to hide it.
I just want to say that I did not say that, because I think it's amazing. But to see what Allen Iverson was able to do in a league that was the land of like big people, and he was just a 6 foot guy and he killed it. Like for me to hear Larry Brown say that and like put it in that perspective was actually like really cool. Like I had a lot of questions like, okay, well, what if Allen Iverson I guess listen to Larry Brown, quote unquote, listen to Larry Brown more, or and then another thing that Larry Brown said that really stayed with me was, at the end of the doc, he says, I wish that I was able to coach like Allen Iverson for the rest of his career. Like I wish they stayed together for the rest of his career. And so again, it was more so like they're both older now. I think they're both more mature now, and they both had some time to just sit with things that happened during that time. So it was like, I think this doc came at the right moment. It was both reflective, but they were able to tell me, how their feelings were during that time as well. They both were great.
What I think's interesting about them both as like subjects to make a documentary about is on the outside, you look at both of them and you wouldn't think they were emotional people, right? Iverson's perception of him coming up and then Larry Brown in general. But they're both people that when I watch them get interviewed, I expect them to cry at almost any moment. Like they're very emotional, which I think is cool. But what I also about them specifically, because that is a large part of the documentary, I'm curious how you think how their relationship would be different in today's kind of media market, because watching what they went through there, I just can't even imagine today with like Twitter and iPhones everywhere and everything, and how it's such, in today's NBA, if there's even the slightest slight at a player, you see them ask for a trade, and they were yelling at each other and cursing and going back and forth in the media. I'm curious, having interviewed both of them and studied it when you did the documentary, how do you think they would have lasted as long today, or
No.
how would it be different? Yeah, exactly. I can't imagine that
The immediate no.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. Like social media would have made that 10 times worse. Like it would have been horrible. And I feel like Allen Iverson or Larry Brown or like the teammates that witnessed it, like they have instant access to like go to the public immediately with social media. Like they can literally go live anytime they want. They can literally post anything that they want. And that just would have just made it 10 times worse. And I don't think they would have made it to 2001 together, tell you the truth, at all. So I think they were supposed to be in that time before social media, because no way would that have lasted. However, I feel like if Allen Iverson and Larry Brown like existed, like if that relationship existed this year, for an example, I think that the person that would have been moved would have been Larry Brown and not Allen Iverson. Like, I don't think, like at that time they had, legendary coaches. And I'm not saying now the NBA doesn't have legendary coaches, they do, but at that time it was like Pat, it was like, real legendary, like Phil Jackson. And I remember talking to Stephen A. Smith and then also Billy King about it. And they both said, at that time, the coaches don't get moved. They're legends. Like your star player would get moved. Now in today's NBA, Allen Iverson wasn't going anywhere. Larry Brown would have been moved. So I think
Larry Brown and then the coach after Larry Brown would have been moved before you moved Allen Iverson.
Exactly. Everybody would have been moved before Allen Iverson. So I think that would have been the major change right there. Like Allen Iverson wouldn't have went anywhere, honestly.
So I want to switch gears just slightly. You were talking about regrets here. You talked a decent amount to Theo Ratliff, talked about the trade they made for Dikembe Mutombo midseason, obviously. I have had the belief for a long time, and this seems kind of crazy given that they went to the finals, but the better version of that team was that team that started the year where they start the year like 41-12 or something, and then they end up, after he gets hurt and they make the trade, they're 15-12, and obviously they win in the playoffs and they have to win a couple of game sevens to get to the finals. But did you sense any sort of regret from anyone, obviously other than Theo, that they made that trade and that they changed a team that had been, really firing on all cylinders for the whole year? Or was his injury just kind of, it is what it is? They had to do it at the time for a guy like Mutombo.
Well, first and foremost, I just want to say my interview with Theo was by far one of my favorite interviews of all time. Like, wow. I felt like Theo put his heart out there and he couldn't wait to tell his story. And like seriously, during that interview with him, I was like, wow, like that, like after he answered the question, I was just like, wow, like that was an amazing answer. Like, wow. I was very, very satisfied with how that went. So that's one thing. And then two, doing the interview with Theo and with everybody else, like his teammates, they all were sad about that. Like Allen said to me during the interview, he was just like, this interview is cool to talk about this trade. Like I'll talk about it now, but after this interview, I don't ever want to talk about the Theo Ratliff trade. Wow. And like they all, like Eric Snow, Aaron McKee, all of them were hurt by that trade. However, I would say, I don't think, and these are my words, these are not their words, I don't think they had regret, because they made it to the championship, right?
Yeah.
Theo did get hurt. And when I was talking to Billy about it, Billy was just like, yeah, Theo, was amazing. But he was like, knowing Theo, like he was supposed to sit out, I believe, 3 weeks, right? For his wrist or something like that, 3 to 4 weeks. But Billy was just like, knowing Theo, he's not going to come back until he's like 1,000% great. And at that time, they didn't have that time. So he was just like, we had to make this move. So I don't think there was a regret, but I know that they all felt hurt and sad about it because like Theo, basically they all grew up together in the league together.
Yeah.
They were together for a few years, and then here comes Dikembe, who hasn't been with them at all. And it kind of messes it up the dynamic a little bit, which is why like they had a couple of like lows later at the later part of that season. But to answer your question, no, I don't think it was regret, but I know that they all were sad because at the end of the day, they still made it to the championship.
It is kind of wild in retrospect, like watching the documentary. So when this was all happening in real time, I was, I don't know, like 13. So I'm not thinking about it from a coverage perspective, but it is wild in today's NBA to think they were the best team in the NBA. They were on a run and they traded one of their starting players. You don't really see that in today's NBA. But a cool part I thought of the documentary was how you did talk to a lot of they were starters, but let's be honest, role players in terms of Eric Snow, Aaron McKee, George Lynch, you mentioned Theo. I'm curious, talking to all of them, just what your biggest takeaway was. Because watching it, I can see how, look, Iverson's a Hall of Famer, and they know that. But I always wonder if there was maybe a little resentment or anything from them in terms of how the entire team was just so focused on Iverson, and they had to all react off him. Curious, getting to talk to them many years later, how you think they viewed their experience with Allen.
No, talking to them, none of them had resentment. Like, and I think even then, like when they were on the team in 2000, 2001, I think they all knew their role. I think they all knew that this team was constructed for Allen Iverson. I don't think it was a secret at all. And so like all throughout the doc, they all knew like, hey, like we were here to support Allen. Allen was the guy. And we are role players. But still at the end of the day, like Aaron McKee was a role player, but he got 6th man of the year.
Yep.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they still put in their work. And a lot of them were having like their career best year that year. Like we talked about Theo Ratliff before he got injured. That was his best year as a center in the league. Eric Snow, like he was having a great year before he started to get hurt. Like those were their best years. So I think that they all knew their role, but I think as Allen Iverson skills and enhance, I think everybody else on the team, their skills enhance as well, which made the team that much better. And it elevated all of them to play better. But no, they didn't have any resentments. They knew exactly what it was and why they were there. And still to this day, they know that as well. But I think they all played a major part in it. And Allen has said like numerous times in my interview and in a lot of interviews that I've seen, like, his teammates helped him get that MVP that year. His teammates, were role players, which they were, but they elevated him to be like that MVP type of person. So nobody had resentments at all.
Did you gain a greater appreciation for just like how much this team meant to Philadelphia in the process of making this documentary? Because Eliot has said it on the podcast that he thinks that Allen's MVP is like up there with winning a championship. Like that's how much it meant to him as a kid. And, obviously you talk to people outside of the team too, right? Like announcers, writers, people who were around the team, around the city at the time. So, how much did that change like what you thought about the team and its relationship to the city? Because like in the last 40 years, that's the only Sixers team that has even come close to getting a title. They haven't gotten past the second round, as we've had to talk about, unfortunately, on this podcast far too many times.
So, that's a good question. So during the doc, because I went to Temple, I know that Philly is just different. Philly fans are just different too. Like I I used to intern at Comcast Sportsnet. So Comcast Sportsnet is located right at the Wachovia. Is it still called the Wachovia?
Man, you are
It's
a
been
throwback.
100
Man.
I used to intern there, and I used to just see Philly fans every single day. And when I used to ride the SEPTA up and down Broad Street, and Philly fans are passionate. Philly fans ride out. Philly fans do not play about their teams at all. So I wanted this doc to really embody Philly altogether, which is why you see murals throughout the whole entire doc, which is why you see scenics. I tried to embody like fans in the storytelling. So a few people in there like Jazzy Jeff, Freeway, the author Clifton Duquette, they are all diehard fans of the 76ers. So I wanted to get their perspective as well. So I wouldn't say that but this is because I lived in Philly. So my perspective of Philly fans did not change, or like the importance of what that 2000 team meant to Philly didn't change at all, because I lived there. I was there. I saw how the fans were. But I would say that this, and please, I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way, but I would say that 2000-2001 team, I think, embodied like Philadelphia, like the fans,
sure.
the best. Like they were great.
I don't think anybody would take that the wrong way. I think people look at Allen Iverson as sort of like he is the ultimate Philly athlete, where he just puts his body on the line, and he gets hit by that thing you were talking about earlier, where he gets hit by bigger players and gets back up and beats them and outscores them. And it's it's a team and a player specifically that really fits with, I think, what Philadelphians see in themselves.
Absolutely. And to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't live in Philadelphia anymore, but to me, I don't think there has been another player or another team that really embodied Philly the way that team has, and the way that Allen Iverson did. And so that's why I think that, Philly will always love that team. Philly will always love Allen Iverson because he truly, and that team as well, embodied exactly what Philadelphia is. And that's just hardworking and gritty, and just a passionate city. Seriously, they are a passionate city. So I hope I answered your question there.
I think you did. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a confession and then a final question. So you brought up the murals. When I'm watching it, I've lived in Philly my whole life, and I thought the mural thing was a really cool way to do it, because one of the cool things is you do drive around the city and you see murals you haven't seen before. And so when you're showing these murals early on, I'm like, man, I got to go check these murals out. Like, where are these? And then when it got to George Lynch mural, I was like, okay, these aren't real murals. Like these are not actual murals in the city. But my question for you was, what did you, either in an interview or something that didn't make the documentary that maybe was just close to getting in, or something that you wish could have made it? Obviously, you deal with time constraints. Just something you would want people that watch a documentary, Sixers fans, to know about this experience, whether it was an answer someone gave or something like that didn't make it into the final version.
That's a good question. I think two things. One of them I already talked about. Well, the first one was like when people look at Allen Iverson, they automatically assume that he was a point guard, right? He was a point guard, but
right.
If you ask him, if you talk to him, he's a shooting guard. So and Larry Brown actually had a hand in switching Allen Iverson from a 1 to the 2. So initially, I had that whole backstory in there of how like Larry Brown came in and he saw the vision for Allen Iverson, and he saw that Allen wasn't really a true point guard, and he moved him to the 2 position, which made a lot of mismatches for like other 2 guards, because Allen Iverson was smaller, but he was also quicker than other 2 guards, so on and so forth. So, and then he brought in Eric Snow to be the point guard. And so I'm a true like basketball fan. So like things like that to me, I geek out about a little bit. Like I really like the backstory on that, but we had to take that out. And I thought that was pretty cool, because if you just look at Allen Iverson, like he looks like a point guard. Like you would just say, oh, that's a point guard. But
especially in today's NBA.
Yeah. In today's NBA, and in reality, if you talk to him, he's a 2. That's it. He's a shooting guard. And so that's one thing that I wish that I had some time for, but I didn't have time for. And then, you know, the other one that I already spoke about, with talking to both Stephen A. Smith and Billy King about how, like, in today's NBA, Allen Iverson's not going anywhere. Like, Larry Brown is the one that's going to be moved. And I wish I would have kind of kept that in there, because I feel like people don't understand how, like, moving a franchise player wasn't rare back in the day, but it is rare today. Like, you're not going to see it today. And I wish I would have kept that in there, to just fully, like, show that and describe that more, if that makes sense, of how, like, crazy or that move was at that time. So, yeah.
I have one last one before we go, because it was something that rattled around in my brain during the documentary. Was there any particular reason that you didn't touch much? You brought up the Game 7 in the Milwaukee series, but didn't feature much of the series leading up to it. And I know that it is kind of a controversial series in some circles. Like, Ray Allen at the time accused the NBA of rigging the series, as did George Karl. And, you know, there's obviously like a sour grapes factor in that. Like, whenever guys lose, it's never like they were worse. It's, you know, the refs or something happened, there's bias or whatever. But so I guess, like, was there any particular reason you didn't cover as much of that series as compared to, you know, obviously the Vince Carter, Allen Iverson back and forth, and Indiana was this big, you got to climb the mountain and beat this team that they hadn't beaten in the playoffs in the past?
Well, number one reason is time, right?
Yeah.
I didn't have time to do that. And then two, this doc is about the 76ers, right? And honestly, to me, when it comes down to it, the most important game right now is Game 7. Because it's tied 3-3. Whoever wins this is moving on. Yeah. So I just felt like, you know, we just need to tell that story. And this is a Sixers doc. So I don't want to get into like, oh, well, Ray Allen thinks that it was rigged or da-da-da-da-da. Like, at the end of the day, I'm telling the story of the Sixers and how they were able to go through the first, second, and third round to get to the finals, and how impressive that was when in reality, they had one guy. So yeah, I never even thought about like talking about anything controversial that happened in the Bucks series, because I don't think we needed to. Like, we're here to celebrate the 76ers. At the end of the day, when you look at history, they got there. Like, they're the ones that won that series. So I didn't think I needed time to do that. What I think I needed time to do was talk about, and Allen does this in the doc, talk about how Ray Allen and Allen Iverson have been rivals since college. That's that. They were drafted together. Now here they are. They're facing each other in the Eastern Conference Finals. And that's the last time the Sixers ever won the Eastern Conference Finals. That's that. So,
some of the only reason I ask is because it's so, I think I've rewatched, especially when COVID first hit, I went back and rewatched a lot of that run just as like there aren't any games on and I got to find a way to write about the Sixers somehow. So I went back and it was like retro recapping and doing different stuff. It is very hard to find the footage for that series specifically. Like, there's a lot of Vince Carter scores 50 against the Sixers and all the NBA Finals games are on YouTube and all that. And the Bucks series, it's like it just got sucked into a wormhole and didn't exist. So I always have to ask about it whenever it's relevant, as it is in this case.
Well, I just to wrap this up. First, I want to say thank you so much for coming on. But on a larger scale, thank you so much for doing this documentary. Yes. As you know, as Sixers fans and also fans of 01, I will consume anything about that team, but this was especially fun. I thought your focus on the regular season was unique compared to other documentaries, and just telling Iverson and Larry Brown and getting them to interview. It was a truly awesome experience. I'm sure for everybody that watched it. So thank you for all the work you did to make it happen and to make it something we were all able to watch during a boring Jokic series. So it gave us something to watch, you know? So, but
I appreciate the kind words, seriously, because the small team that I had on this and we worked nights and weekends for months. It was hard. Working on a doc is not easy. And I think people think
I can only imagine. Yeah.
Right. And I think when people think about TV, I think people think it magically just appears on, on the TV, and they don't know how much of the behind the scenes work that goes into it. And it's hours. It's hard. It's long. And so I'm really, really happy with the finished product. I have gotten a lot of people from Philly, including yourselves, to tell me that it was great. And that's all that matters to me. Like, as long as I did right by the people that's in this doc, and honestly, the Philly people, that's all that matters to me. Like, people have left me like voice messages in my DMs.
Wow.
Oh my God, like, this was amazing. I was able to relive it, so on and so forth. And that is what truly matters to me. So I just want to say thank you for just acknowledging that, because for real, we worked so hard, and I just want it to just pay off, honestly. So thank you.
Well,
Listen, as someone who's now a cold-hearted, non-emotional media member after growing up, Iverson was like my hero. It was a fun way to like revisit that part of my life where it's, that kind of created my basketball fandom or interest in basketball, and that led me to where I am today. So it was effective for me. Then that means that I'm sure that thousands, if not millions, of Sixers fans are very happy with it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot.
Awesome. So thank you so much for the time, and look forward to whatever your next documentary is after watching this. Even, I'll definitely be watching that. So thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. That was the interview with Brittany. Awesome thing to get to hear how that documentary was made. Also, shout out fellow Temple grad. That was really cool. So thank you everyone that listened. We'll have a pod later in the week where we'll get into current Sixers things, but it was really fun to take a fun trip down memory lane about this team. So Kyle, I'll talk to you next time, man.
Talk to you guys soon.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button right here. You'll get all the videos in a playlist, and make sure you leave a comment in the section below to let us know what you think.
And don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date. All our latest updates, new episodes, new podcasts. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.